Welcome back to my Redwood adventure. My third night in this new and unforgiving world began with the warm orange glow of the rising sun and the increasingly loud buzzing of countless insects waking in the morning light. During the night, I had chopped a great deal of firewood, which I stacked in a corner of my tree fort before jumping into the water and swimming to the far side of the lake. The mushrooms on a nearby tree became my breakfast, after which I began gathering cattails for additional storage. I had two goals. The first was to gather enough food to avoid starving. The second was to collect materials. I couldn't keep everything in the treehouse. Fire pits especially would be a danger to the very flammable structure. But I could build a series of smaller buildings around the area I wanted to use for farming. Each of those structures could serve a different purpose for my greater base. For example, one build could be dedicated to clay forming and firing, another for smithing and metalwork, and yet another for anything related to crops or livestock. Ultimately, I would have my living space in the treehouse and my workspace in the field. I just needed enough building materials to get started. As I explored the area, I found yet another trader, this one by the name of N. Repos, an artisan who sold tapestries and pottery. He was also offering to give me a couple gears in exchange for peat, which I had just collected. It seemed like a good trade, so I gave him my peat and walked away with 2 more gears to my name. I didn't have anything else I could sell him, but I made a note to keep an eye out for a few of the items he was interested in. I then marked my map so I could find him easily again. This area was full of cattails, and they weren't too far from my base. A short swim or walk, and I could easily collect lots of them. I attempted to hunt a deer, but it was far too fast, and the growing fog made it difficult to see the target. Instead of wasting my energy on chasing animals through the mist, I decided to return to my base and empty my pockets. But first I realized there was a deposit of clay on my new land, which meant I wouldn't have to go far to hunt for it. There were even a few cranberry bushes, which would help in preventing my starvation. I took a moment to get a better lay of the land. A small pit seemed like a good area to build a cellar for food storage. If I flattened the land next to the pit, I could build a connecting structure for storing items that weren't in need of preservation. The only concern was the continually collapsing ground. Dirt was far too unstable to use for flooring or cellar walls. I would need to replace it with something sturdier. I began to dig out a circular structure for the above-ground storage area. I would still need logs, sticks, and dry grass for the walls and ceiling, but a simple floor would provide the structural footprint of the building. I decided to use the rammed earth variant, which most resembled bricks, and placed a few logs as the supporting columns for the build. Unfortunately, I did not have a way to control the direction the quarter logs faced. I would likely have to replace them with a log type which looked the same on all sides. I also needed more food, preferably before my hunger reached 0. Luckily, there were more cranberry bushes nearby. There was also a forested area, which might have mushrooms, but might also have wolves. Instead of wolves, I spotted two creatures dotting through the brush and chased them into a pond. The smaller of the two was a young deer, but the other was something else. I tried to get closer, but it bounded away too quickly. I would have to search for it again later. In the meanwhile, I found black currant berries and amaranth. I had seen amaranth in other games, but was not certain what it was exactly. In fact, I was surprised by the bright color of the flowering part of this crop, and was more surprised that it produced a grain when broken. This meant two things. First, I could make amaranth bread, and second, that I could make amaranth alcohol. I continued to explore, wondering what other treats I might find. As I did, I began collecting berry bushes. Now that I had the beginnings of a base, I would need a proper berry field for easy collecting of the fruits. Unfortunately, the darkness was once again growing. As I made my way home, I saw the spotted creature once again. It looked somewhat like a goat, but I couldn't be sure. As I contemplated this mystery, I gathered sunflower seeds and hurried back. I still needed to empty my pockets and plant the berry bushes. They would need to be somewhere reasonably flat and further away from the buildings, but not too far, or it would be inconvenient. By the time I emptied my pockets, I could hardly see where I was going. I managed to get back, but I was once again reminded that I needed torches. Since I had yet to collect enough dried grass, I would have to burn precious firewood instead. It also meant I would, once again, be unable to sleep through the night. The only upside was the clay I had collected while exploring. That night, I spent my time forming out the various clay items and molds I would need. Vessels for storage, bowls for eating, and a cooking pot for, well, cooking. I paused a moment as thunder interrupted my task. I could not see the dark clouds, only stars, and I didn't yet hear the rain. As I made several crock pots, I heard the thunder once again. It was louder and likely growing closer. I continued with another storage vessel before working on the items I would need for metalworking. I didn't have enough copper to enter the new age, but I planned to get there soon enough and saw no harm in having the crucible and molds ready to go. I finished the hammer mold and looked to the east as lightning flashed across the glow of the rising dawn. The stars faded as the sound of insects once again filled the morning. It was time to go back to work. I collected the rammed earth from my basket and picked an area to clear away for a new structure. This would be my clay forming pavilion. For now, it mostly just needed a few holes in the floor. I decided to put my clay items in those holes as a way to empty my pockets while I collected more resources. This included a large amount of dry grass. I took extra care to fully clear the grass from around the pit kilns so I wouldn't accidentally cause a wildfire. Naturally, I miscalculated how much dry grass I would need and had to collect more. I then had to head for the woods to collect as many sticks as I could carry. It didn't take too long, so I returned to the pit kilns and loaded them up with sticks. I only had enough peat for 2 of the kilns, so I needed firewood for the rest. First, however, I needed to make a new axe and to chop down more trees. Pit kilns full, I watched lightning flash in the distance and ate the last of my berries before collecting enough sticks for a new fire starter. I then spotted a rooster and crouched low, ready to hunt it with my spear. I changed my mind, however, when a young chick appeared just behind it. It wasn't like wild chickens had much meat on them anyway. Instead, I harvested some local mushrooms and then got excited as I found a new crop. Soybeans. I knew I could make soy sauce with them, but I wondered if I could also make tofu. Did they count as a protein or a vegetable, or maybe both? I returned to my base with my prizes and remembered that my pit kilns still needed to be lit. I also needed to cover them before the rain started, or the flames would go out. Naturally, rammed earth was the best option. I could replace it with something better later, or at least to make it look nicer once I had better material for building. It was growing dark, so I returned to my base, but there was still just enough light for one more task. So I clumsily removed the log stairs and installed a ladder instead. I munched a few mushrooms and then began making a gate and some fences from the cypress logs. I intended to use them in place of walls on this level of the base. It would be a crude design, but it would look nice enough until I had access to planks and a chisel. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough for all the walls, or even a complete railing. As I waited for morning, I rearranged my inventory, napped a new knife, and finally remembered to make torches, one of which I placed near the fire, just in case. Finally, it was light enough to leave, although the darkened clouds would prevent it from getting any brighter, at least in this area. Only a few blocks away, the sun was shining, and a new rift was opening before my eyes. I grabbed loose stones, harvested several cattails, roots included, and then collected even more rocks. Eventually, the limestone became peridot. With a wider variety of stones, I would be able to add some color variations to my builds. I even found more surface copper and marked the spot on my map just before another rift opened nearby. I wanted to get the first couple structures completed and then work on the farm. Once I had food growing, I could turn my attention to entering the Copper Age. I found even more surface copper and then started to make my way back to the base, collecting every rock on the way. I then walked past my base until the limestone turned to conglomerate. With this, I would have 3 types of stone to work with. As I stopped to collect mushrooms, I saw the spotted creature again. I followed it across the water and tried to sneak closer, but it bleated at me and disappeared. It was still too fast to get a good look. I returned to my base, dodged a newly opening rift, and emptied my pockets again. By now, my pit kilns were done burning, and I could collect the items. The molds and crucibles I put in the storage area, and the rest I carried back to my base, stopping only a moment to be distracted by edible mushrooms. I put the cooking pot on the fire and laid the bowls, crocks, and vessels nearby. It was still pretty light, so I grabbed all my bowls and decided to make mushroom soup. I chose quantity over quality since my food was limited. As the soup cooked, I grabbed the new fences and added them to the walls of the treehouse. It still wasn't enough. Once again, I had forgotten to make a bed, and with no task to occupy my time, I could only sit and listen to the rain. The sun finally rose and the rain continued to fall. My next task was to prepare the area that would become my farm. The plan was to create a terraced structure with different crops on each layer, but the instability of the soil meant I would need other blocks to stabilize the area. I collected the nearby clay and combined it with peridot stones to create cobblestone and lined the edge of the water. I cleared more soil, watched the ground collapse, and continued to dig. I attempted to fill in the soil near the water, but it kept collapsing each time. If I hadn't run out of cobblestone, I could have used it to stabilize the area, but I was stubborn, and it did eventually stop falling. I used the rammed earth to create a platform 1 block below the water. I placed dirt on top and then planted the cattail roots I hadn't yet eaten. While there was plenty of cattail nearby, I still preferred to have an even more plentiful source in the immediate area. I needed more sticks and stones, so I headed out once more to collect them. The sun brightened the day as I left the rain clouds behind and collected my first bit of spelt. I also found some onion seeds and a patch of tulle. I needed thatch for a couple roofs, so naturally I collected it, roots and all. I made my way back to the peridot land, since that was the stone I most wanted to use in the terraces. This meant walking through the rain again, but it was worth it, especially when I managed to hunt a rabbit and finally obtain some red meat. I even found some new ruins to explore. There seemed to be a hidden area below, so I collected the cobblestone to save on materials and eventually uncovered an old ruined ladder that barely worked. I also found a block I couldn't break with my hands, and for a moment I worried I wouldn't be able to get into the hidden room. Luckily, the ground at the bottom of the ladder was just dirt, and I finally got in. The room was small, with barely any space to stand. It seemed to have been used for storage at some point. The cracked vessel dropped several flax twine and a basket, none of which I picked up due to full pockets, and the ruined basket only had a bean-aid, which I would have to collect another time. By now it was getting dark, so I returned home, stopped to mark Olivine on my map, and eventually remembered I had torches to light my way. Not that it helped my directionally challenged self. I was lucky I remembered to put away my torch before jumping in the water. I only took a little damage before finally laying eyes on the faint light from my treehouse. I gulped down some watery soup and threw my rabbit meat into the cooking pot. I then made a few new tools and listened to the rain while lamenting my lack of a bed. Morning came and the rain continued. I placed my cobblestone first at the water's edge and then as the wall of the terrace. I had to make a bit more cobblestone and quickly found it wasn't enough. I was beginning to think it best I limit my peridot needs until I had a pickaxe. In the meanwhile, I created a new platform in the water, this time for the tool. I used up all my rammed earth, but since soil is everywhere, I merely had to do a bit of landscaping to get the materials to make more. Next, I decided to work on the claywork pavilion. I chose to use rammed earth, but in a different pattern for the back pillars, and connect them with limestone cobblestone walls. I then extended the cobblestone walls upward to create the front pillars. I used more rammed earth for the roof since it needed to not catch fire, and shaped it to a point. I once again used all my materials and had to do a bit of digging before I could finish it. I decided to let the back and front of the roof drop down for a more decorative shape, and made note to add details once I had a chisel. More importantly, my hunger was approaching rock bottom, and I hurried to my treehouse to gulp down the remaining soup and to fill my bowl with cold porridge. No longer starving, I set out to collect cypress logs and dry grass. At long last, I had a bedroll. I used the thatch to make roof bits for the clay pavilion. It wasn't nearly enough, but it was a start. I returned to my treehouse, laid my bed in a corner, and waited for darkness so I could finally sleep. Thank you for watching, everyone. Happy haunting, and remember, take care of yourself.